All right, let's take a look at the Screwtape Letters, letter 1. In this letter, our first letter from Screwtape, right, that senior advisor writing to his nephew Wormwood, who is tempting this patient on earth, the major thing he talks about here is how he should use words to convince the patient, to lead him away from truth and to lead him slowly to hell. So one of the words that he uses again and again is jargon. Jargon means unintelligible or meaningless talk or writing. So instead of focusing on actual arguments or actual discussion of things that are true, he wants to instead move into this way of speaking about things that is kind of unintelligible or meaningless. So he talks about how there was a time, right, when humans could argue, and if something was proved, they would actually believe it, but that we're in a time and a place where humans no longer necessarily follow a chain of reasoning. They don't really care if there's a good argument. We are already entrenched in our views, and we stay in those views. He talks about how your man has been accustomed ever since he was a boy to having a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing about together in his head. So jargon here says instead of thinking of them as true or false, think about them as academic or practical, outworn, contemporary, conventional, or ruthless. That would all be jargon. So those words, they do have some meaning, but when we say them often, there's not much meaning that is behind them. If something is academic, that can mean a variety of different things, right? So unless we define our terms, it's just jargon, right? Just jargon, unintelligible, meaningless talk or writing. Right, so as I just said, Screwtape informs Wormwood that arguments not super helpful. Focus on this as a way to keep him from the truth. Right, we talked about the truth with the 8th commandment, that leads us back to God. And so if the devils can keep us away from truth, that would be what they want to do. He talks about how when we argue, it awakens the patient's reason. Once it is awake, who can foresee the result? So they want us to not use our reason, to act primarily on emotion and feelings. So he talks about this example, this patient of his that Screwtape had, who one day is sitting in the British Museum, and he starts to think about, what if this isn't real? What if the things I see aren't real? What if there's a deeper, higher reality? And so the enemy, right, God, is there at a moment encouraging this thought. And so what Screwtape does here, the devil, is he fixes his mind immediately back on immediate sense experiences. So he says, aren't you hungry? Isn't it time for lunch? Once he gets outside, he sees a newsboy shouting at the midday paper, number 73, a bus going by. And so he reminds him, he focuses him back on the things he can see as being real. So what he experienced in that museum, those thoughts of a higher world and something greater, is not real. He's convincing him that the things he can see and smell and touch, immediate sense experiences, that these are somehow more real. And so that's what the devils want us to do. They want us to fix our attention on the stream of immediate sense experiences. Instead of drawing our minds to God, to something higher, what do I want to eat right now? What would make me comfortable right now? What are my immediate fears and hopes and dreams and desires, right? And especially with our senses. So instead of looking to God and trusting in Him, focusing on self. Okay? Keep pressing on him the ordinariness of things. Do not use science, because real science, again, makes us think about things that we can't see. When we study the atom, that's not something we can see or smell or touch. But so it leads us that there's real things that go beyond our sight and smell and our sense experiences. So real science is a danger that Screwtape wants to keep this patient away from. Lastly, he tells us at the end of the letter, do remember that you are there to fuddle him. The devil's purpose is to fuddle humans. From the way that some of you young fiends talk, anyone would suppose it was our job to teach. So the devils are not here to teach us about the truth or what is real or good, but to confuse us and to fuddle us as humans. Okay? Again, if you have any questions or comments, please add them here. For this letter, you will need to post in the discussion question, so go ahead and head there now if you haven't done that already.